All right, coming up, Bishop on Air. Thanks for hanging out. It's Wednesday morning, and we've got plenty to get to. We've got to tackle the council corral from last night's Springfield City Council meeting. That'll be later on in the show as a bonus. But before that, we've got to get to a review of what happened yesterday during the first of the last 3 days of fall veto session at the Illinois State House. And that, of course, is a ongoing developing story because the second day is today. So we'll actually be out there and covering what happens. Yesterday, you had several early morning committees dealing with a variety of important issues. We'll tackle that. We'll also tell you what they didn't take up yesterday in the final days of legislative session for this calendar year before the end of the year deadline. But they did indeed have a joint committee on administrative rules hearing yesterday, and we will get to that. So stay tuned. It's coming up here with Bishop on Air. Hey. Show yesterday was the first of 3 final days of legislative session, and amid all of the activity there is to try to override the governor's veto or agree with the mandatory vetoes, you had the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules meet. And this is a committee of equal parts Democrats and Republicans. It is a bipartisan legislative committee that is meant to oversee the rulemaking process when it comes to laws that are crafted, passed, and enacted. One thing we've been focusing on day in, day out is the litigation against the state's gun and magazine ban. But as that litigation continues, the ban is in place. It's been in place since January 10th. You cannot purchase certain semi-automatic firearms unless you are part of a special class that the law carved out. There are challenges about that idea of having equal protection rights violations there. But you also have the Second Amendment rights, which are in the courts. You had the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals on Friday overturn a lower court's preliminary injunction, but in the lower courts, there's separate arguments from those cases still being argued and yet to see any outcome there. So the case is still being debated in the courts on whether the law is constitutional. But you do have the rules that Illinois State Police filed, emergency rules they filed for the gun registry as part of the law that kicked in October 1st. And there's a January 1st deadline to register or face criminal penalties. So the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, and if you've been watching for a while, you saw that how last month they meet monthly, this bipartisan group. There were 2 motions that were brought up. One was a motion to oppose the emergency rules for the gun ban registry. That was split bipartisan. All right, so it did not pass. Instead, they had a motion for a recommendation, and they recommended state police hold 3 public hearings. Illinois State Police conducted those 3 public hearings. They were at JCAR yesterday to provide an update. Here is Suzanne Bond. She is an attorney with Illinois State Police, providing an overview to the committee yesterday at the State House.
Yes, sir. The final hearing concluded yesterday. They were well attended by the public and various organizations. Those groups have committed to sending us their questions in writing to the extent possible. If we had answers, we did provide them. We pointed them to relevant FAQs on our website, which have been updated. One of the things that came out of the hearing yesterday that we are currently working on is that we were asked if we could put forth like a roadmap of how the FAQs had been updated so that people will know what FAQs are new, what FAQs have been amended, and we are working to do that and hope to have that up maybe later this week, definitely before the end of November. We are in the process, so you can see I have a binder, and within this binder are the emails that we had received prior to the deadline set for the hearings themselves. We are in the process of organizing all of the emails that we have received, even those that continued to come in after the deadline. We are dividing them up into people who just wanted to submit a comment, people who had questions. We are now getting suggested language for our proposed rules. So we are dividing that up into buckets, if you will, so that we can address questions either through the FAQs, through the amendments to the proposed rules, or both, depending on what is most appropriate. We received a letter from your staff with 32 questions, I believe, and we anticipate responding to that memo this week with answers to all of those questions and pointing out where we will be adding to FAQs, where we have already added to FAQs, and where we will be proposing amendments to our proposed rules to address the questions that your staff has raised.
This is Susan Bond. She is a attorney with Illinois State Police, breaking down some of the questions that they've heard, and also telling JCAR that they will indeed respond to questions that JCAR's proposed, more than 30 questions that JCAR's proposed. So the question is also, well, there's a lot of people that wanted to provide public comment, but they couldn't provide public comment because the cutoff time for them to actually physically provide that comment. Instead, she said that, yes, indeed, there is a November 20th deadline for people to provide written comment. And if you go and check out their website here, of course, this is the public statement that they made, buried in the Illinois Register. If you're not familiar with the Illinois Register, it is not the newspaper, not the State Journal Register, the Illinois Register, maintained by the Secretary of State's office. It is a rolling publication, and there are thousands of pages published to this of administrative rules, of different types of announcements. Whenever the governor had all the emergency declarations he had during COVID, those were all published in the Illinois Register. It is a rolling publication of thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. I mean, just tens of thousands of pages. But they had this in the Illinois Register. Do you go and read the Illinois Register regularly as a gun owner to, keep up to date with what your state government's doing? Highly doubt that. But anyways, this was in there.
I think
you can check this out where you've got the indication of when the written comments can be provided and where you can provide those written comments. And it says right here, name and address, an agency contact person, any interested party may direct comments, data, views, or arguments concerning this proposal by November 20th. All right, so you got to email isp.legal.publiccomments@illinois.gov, or you can snail mail Kelly Griffith, Chief Legal Counsel, Illinois State Police, 801 South 7th Street, Suite 1001S, Springfield, IL 62704. By November 20th, you can provide those written comments for these emergency rules. So State Representative Ryan Spain, who's a co-chair of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, he encouraged people to get those public comments in.
I think it'd be useful for clarification. If it's not November 20th, I would just encourage any public who are listening. I would encourage make your comments known in the next week. And I appreciate some flexibility from the state police and your ability to respond and receive those comments. But the period of public comment is coming to a close sometime in the near future. So now is the time to raise any further questions. I know that some people attended these hearings with the expectation that they would be able to testify or make some comments on the record. But if they had missed the deadline for doing so for the public hearing, they may not have been able to participate at one of the 3 hearings you've held. So the final recourse for submitting comments is to do so now. I would advise in the next maybe week's worth of time, I would encourage anyone listening to do so.
And Spain went on to talk about the importance of having the record as well, because there were public hearings and some people couldn't hear during those public hearings. Even during the first public hearing, there were problems with the WebEx. They had to have a phone off to the side to be able to have somebody on the phone going through the WebEx because there wasn't a connection with the computers that they had set up in the Springfield meeting. Chicago meeting seemed to go off without a hitch, but there wasn't much public turnout despite Todd Vandermeide being there to provide public comment. But and several others as well. Don't want to downplay that, but you still have the lack of people hearing what happened. So Ryan Spain, he asks, is there going to be a public record here for these comments and the responses from Illinois State Police to actually be heard, like video, audio recordings, not just what Greg Bishop captured? And trust me, I get it. I've had people reach out saying, can you please post the raw? Listen, I didn't take the entirety of these meetings. As a reporter, I'm bouncing around trying to get different angles and capturing snippets, and then I'm like, okay, that's good. I might be able to provide some of that, but not the entirety that everybody wants. You can get that at the Illinois State Police website. If you go to their frequently asked questions page and the Protect Illinois Communities Act page, you can actually see that. I'll pull that up here in a moment for you. But here is the attorney for ISP saying, indeed, those will be posted, man. They are posted.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I know that I received some feedback that, and I think this was specific to yesterday, but the room configuration may have been a little bit difficult to hear. I know that we had streaming coverage of these hearings. Is there a way for the public to go back, or is there a recording available of the hearings if anyone missed them and they would like to listen to them again?
Yes, there are recordings from WebEx from all three that will be, there will be a link on the State Police website to all three of those hearings. Then, I'm going to mess this up, but the Blue Room maybe also streamed the first two hearings, and there are links to those on our website, or there will be links to those on our website as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Final question then, just sort of setting the stage for, or setting our expectations together for when we will meet again as this committee in December. That meeting will take place at the Blandick Building in Chicago. But do you anticipate the state police will be prepared at that time to discuss changes from the emergency rules to now the proposed permanent rules, that changes that have been contemplated and considered as a result of these three hearings? Will you be able to tell us what has changed when we meet again in December?
That is what we would prefer to do. We would like to give the public as much notice on changes as possible. And so I believe if we don't make your December meeting, then they won't have an opportunity to see those changes. So we're working with the JCAR staff to ensure that we are able to get on that agenda and provide you with at least as many proposed changes as we have before that November 20th.
So, a question that we'll delve into with both Ryan Spain and with co-chair State Senator Bill Cunningham, a Democrat, again, a bipartisan committee here. Are they going to suspend the rules? If this is still maintained in the courts and there's continued mounting questions about vagueness, could JCAR suspend those rules? Because there's three options. They tried two of them last month. It was a tie vote on objecting, which really just would have been, something to say to the courts, look, the legislative body doesn't appreciate these rules either, so the courts strike this down. But that didn't pass. They got the motion for recommendation to have these public hearings. There's a third motion they could make, and that's to suspend these rules, these emergency rules. So we'll hear what State Representative Ryan Spain had to say about that question, but also State Senator Bill Cunningham had to say about that question. But State Senator Sue Rezin, she had a particular question during the JCAR hearing yesterday for Suzanne Bond, the state police attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I received a few phone calls in the last hearing that you had regarding it was very difficult to hear because there wasn't a microphone set up. Just, for the record, can you explain what happened and let us know on the previous hearings, was that the issue as well, or was there some kind of problem at this particular place?
We had a very difficult time locating a facility that could accommodate us in the southern portion of the state. Caseyville was very gracious and agreed to allow us to use their village hall. I believe it was a miscommunication. There was a misunderstanding that we thought that there would be a speaker in PA. If we had realized that there was not, we would have brought one with us. I suppose hindsight's 2020, we should have been prepared with our own.
So hindsight's 2020. Should have been prepared. with their own. Listen, Illinois State Police, and I think everybody recognizes, has a tall order here with crafting these rules and getting public input. But the
questions on it.
The consequence here of these rules could lead people to become a felon if they don't either hightail it out of the state, transfer their firearms to somebody else out of state, destroy their firearms, maybe take it to a buyback program if it's being offered, or just turn them over, right? Or people who don't comply, they could face possible criminal charges. Yeah, your district attorney, your state's attorney, your sheriff might not file charges, but what about the Illinois Attorney General? Could they step in? I don't know these answers. But still, you've got the ongoing question of the consequence here. And they didn't do justice to get a PA system so that the public impacted by this could actually understand the ramifications of all of this. Regardless. All right, so that was JCAR yesterday with Illinois State Police there to answer questions. We connected with State Representative Ryan Spain afterwards at a different event, and we'll talk about the Invest in Kids stuff here in a moment. But you got Ryan Spain, co-chair of JCAR, asked at a news conference about what's going on here with the rules for the gun ban registry.
We continue to work with the Illinois State Police. They've promulgated emergency rules regarding the registration of certain firearms. They just finished having their public hearings. They had 3 throughout the state. So now it's time to collect all of the feedback, which was very, very extensive. And they've committed to reporting back, answering those very meaningful questions for citizens, for responsible firearm owners throughout the state, and addressing changes that should be made at our December JCAR meeting. Yeah, we need to move quickly, though. We need to understand what changes are happening because there is January 1st requirement. So I think it would be better to see some adjustments from the state police in December rather than waiting for after a deadline is passed and then understanding what changes might be made for permanent rules. Yeah, I think there are a number of unresolved issues, so I look forward to seeing if they come any closer to resolution. I think ultimately we're waiting for some action on this now at the Supreme Court level. The Supreme Court of the United States is going to need to weigh in on these issues, and I expect that they will at some time. But you raise a lot of very fair questions. For in the meantime, what does this mean for law-abiding firearm owners in the state of Illinois who continue to raise a lot of legitimate questions to the state police about their requirements and responsibilities?
But should there be a vote to suspend?
Well, we'll see. I mean, I called for a vote to issue a formal objection, which resulted in a tie during our October meeting.
So again, the question is, could JCAR vote? Is it judicious for them to vote to suspend these rules, especially as it's pending litigation? You've got the question possibly going up to the U.S. Supreme Court, if not the law being put on hold by the Southern District Court. That's a possibility with pending cases still. Democrat State Senator Bill Cunningham, co-chair of JCAR, we connected with him afterwards and asked him these pointed questions about the whole process of the gun ban registry rules.
I don't want to guess about what sort of action the department will take at any subsequent meeting. I will say that the state police have done a good job of reaching out for public input. That's what we've asked them to do. They held 3 community hearings to take input. That's not something they had to do, but we requested they do that. They have. And I think they have a very difficult job in front of them right now, and I think they're doing it well. I don't know what sort of, off the top of my head, I don't know what the calendar looks like, what sort of statutory deadlines we're dealing with. So because of that, I don't want to speculate in it. I just don't know what the time frame is without checking with staff.
So Cunningham, not sure necessarily how impacted people may be come January 1st, but he was also asked just about the ongoing confusion that there is and how they're going to be able to manage that if there is, say, low compliance rate, as we saw. 2,900 people have told state police that they have some kind of banned item. There are 2.4 million firearm owners identification card holders. Granted, not all of them have a firearm, but just as a people who say they're gun owners, only 0.12% have told police that they have that. Is that the number of state police that have complied with this? Is that the number of other law enforcement that may have complied with this? I don't know. Of course, do you want that to be known who actually registered? I think that's the whole point here against registration that people are making, is that it violates the Fifth Amendment, violates the 14th Amendment, also has questionable outcomes for hackers and so on. But either way, Senator Cunningham talked about some of the other ins and outs when it comes to the questions and the concerns and the confusion.
Yeah, listen, this is something we get into with JCAR a lot. The law is the law. There is no changing the law in the rulemaking process. Obviously, there are important details that are added on, but there are individuals that just simply disagree with this law that it is in place. So I don't know that they're ever going to be pleased with the final product, but we have to make sure that the state police follows the proper rulemaking procedures. They have done that so far, and I anticipate if they continue to do that, then a rule will go forward.
And more from Cunningham, questions from the media yesterday.
I wouldn't want to speculate. We have a saying that every law is constitutional until a court tells you it's not. So the state police has to go along with the rulemaking as contemplated by the law.
With this emergency rule in place, though, for 150 days from late September, it puts the question way past January 1st. With these emergency rules in place and the question possibly in front of the Supreme Court, isn't it judicious to suspend the rules until a date out?
I think, as I said, we have to assume that the law is constitutional until a court tells us it's not.
So again, that's just some of the response from both sides of the aisle on this when it comes to, are the commissioners there, the legislators on the Joint Commission on Administrative Rules, going to vote to suspend the rules? They meet next month. They did not take a vote yesterday. They just simply asked some questions from ISP and got some updates. They meet next month in Chicago, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. We'll cover that. We'll bring you the latest each and every weekday morning here with Bishop on Air. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow along. Find me on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, whatever is your social media poison. But obviously YouTube here live each and every weekday morning from 7:40ish to whenever. All right, but got to take a quick breather, and then we'll be back to talk a bit more about, veto session and the first of the final 3 days. Today's the second of the final 3 days. But what happened yesterday? Some interesting stuff popping up in the Legislative Audit Commission and the Senate Executive Appointments Committee and the Investing Kids Scholarship Grants program that's going to expire unless lawmakers do something about it. Stay tuned. We'll get to all of that. Well, Illinois fall veto session well underway. It was 6 days scheduled. They had 3 days scheduled in October before Halloween, and the House canceled one of those days. They had 3 days scheduled this week, and today is the second of those 3 days. We'll see what happens. But what happened yesterday? They did take up, an amendatory veto of Governor J.B. Pritzker's changes to a law dealing with public-private partnerships in local government. So they ended up passing and agreeing with the amendatory veto out of the House. Really in the weeds, minutia stuff there. I mean, it will impact local government. But they took that up yesterday in the House. The Senate took up a whole bunch of appointments about executive agencies, and we'll actually hear a little bit of one in particular. But you also had the Senate take up a measure dealing with Chicago school board maps, because Chicago was the only district in Illinois that didn't have an elected school board. They're now on the way to get an elected school board after some legislation passed several years ago. But now they got to get the maps in place. So the Senate approved that moving forward, and we'll see how that plays out in the House. Those things not necessarily dealing with vetoes, right? Another issue that came up yesterday but was not advanced. State Senator Sue Resin's trying to lift the moratorium on new nuclear power plants being built. The governor vetoed that over the summer, saying he wanted small modular nuclear reactors. And the legislation that passed with bipartisan supports dealt with, he saw it as just opening the door for all kinds of nuclear energy reactors. So State Senator Sue Rezin did talk a little bit about her bill at the Senate Executive Committee last night. So they're working, right? They're holding committee hearings and being in the public and whatnot. But early in the morning, there were several committees that met. One was the Legislative Audit Commission. We talked last segment about the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules that oversees the administrative rules process. The Legislative Audit Commission looks at audits of state agencies, and they met yesterday to just go over a variety of different things. And one in particular that they picked up on is a resolution that they're looking to adopt from State's Representative Amy Ellick to look at migrant healthcare costs. If you remember, Illinois, we are, I don't know how many other states do this, but we subsidize healthcare coverage for those over the age of 65 and those over the age of 42. We suspended the over the age of 42 non-citizen healthcare benefits that taxpayers pay for at the beginning of this fiscal year, July 1st. Then the governor announced that November 6th, they were capping the amount of new enrollees for those over the age of 65. But all of that, still those enrollees are in, and they're costing taxpayers money for subsidies. So State Representative Amy Ellick wants the Auditor General to audit this program because costs are now anticipated to be well over budget. $550 million is what's budgeted for this fiscal year for non-citizen migrants' healthcare costs subsidized by the Illinois taxpayer. But the projection is going to be $800+ million. So where are these costs coming from? What's driving this? Here's the resolution heard at the Legislative Audit Commission yesterday.
Presenting LAC Resolution Number 165 that directs the Auditor General to conduct a performance audit of HFS's administration of the programs that provide Medicaid coverage to undocumented seniors and adults. The audit will include a review of 3 years of enrollment and cost estimates, actual enrollment and costs, and it will include splits for the 3 age bands of the program, which are 65 plus, ages 55 to 64, and ages 42 to 54. The audit will also include the determination of the cost by category of service and the fee-for-service payments using enhanced rates. We worked on this language with the Auditor General to be sure that the procedures that we're asking for within the audit are doable. And so, but the resolution came about this past spring after the March 31st report by HFS of the updated enrollment and cost estimates for these HBIS and HBIA programs. The report revealed that both the actual cost and the number of enrollees significantly exceeded estimates. So since these Medicaid programs spend a significant amount of state dollars and are not always eligible for the federal match, and we've seen the program be limited this year because of the ballooning costs, we feel that the General Assembly really can't make responsible budget decisions without having accurate information about the cost of the program. So the audit will ensure that we know how the estimates are being made and will provide transparency on the costs being incurred.
Like the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, the Legislative Audit Commission is a bipartisan committee, equal parts Republican and Democrat. So when they have a resolution like this, it's typically agreed upon. So they're going to have the Auditor General investigate this. Democratic State Representative Fred Crespo, he's a co-chair of the Legislative Audit Commission. He talked about the concerns there are with this program and the inflated numbers that they're seeing come in.
Representative Ellick, correct me if I'm wrong. There are many issues, but number one is the sheer dollar amount attached to this program. Number one. Number two, I think HFS has stated that they know what the problem was. So hopefully the Auditor General will be able to ascertain whether that was the case or whether there were other issues.
So clearly that's an audit that will happen. When are we going to see those numbers? It's going to be fascinating, especially if we get those numbers heading into the budget season, which is going to fire up in January. The budget year starts July 1st of each calendar year. That's the fiscal year for the state of Illinois. We spend $50+ billion. $10 billion plus is for pensions. $10 billion plus is for K through 12 schools. And they're spending nearly $1 billion for non-citizen healthcare costs, fully subsidized by the Illinois taxpayer. But hey, how about some more billions? You remember that COVID era where we had the explosion of unemployment because Governor J.B. Pritzker decided which businesses were essential and which businesses weren't, said that a restaurant couldn't have indoor service, and that schools had to do at-home learning, and a whole bunch of other people were thrown into disarray. They had to go on unemployment. I remember watching those numbers, and at one point it got up to 200,000 people claiming for unemployment in Illinois, and then you started hearing the stories about Congress people getting unemployment checks when they didn't receive them and when they didn't request them. You got the stories of prisoners. We had questions for a year and a half, 2 years to the Illinois Department of Employment Security on how much fraud there was. Couldn't get an answer. It took multiple audits. Auditor General Frank Martino's office actually did try to audit and said multiple times the state agency under the Pritzker administration did not keep proper records, so they couldn't tell how much fraud there was. And then last 6 months or so, we get an audit that says there was $5.2 billion of overpayments from the Illinois Department of Employment Security in those unemployment payments going out. And they found $40+ million going to prisoners, other millions of dollars going to people who were dead. So there were some significant problems and some substantial fraud that happened. State Senator Chapin Rose is part of the Legislative Audit Commission. He was pretty passionate about how the state really slipped up on this.
From May of 2020, it was not implemented until September of 2021.
And what he's talking about there is a recommendation from the federal government on how to curb fraud that the state delayed implementing for months on end.
From May of 2020, it was not implemented until September of 2021. Okay? That was just one of the recommendations from the United States government on how to prevent fraud. Other states implemented those things. Here's another one. We did not do cross matches to combat fraud. And as of February of 2022, we were still not utilizing the prisoner update processing system and bank account verification services, respectively. So if COVID started in January of 20, and we still weren't implementing the prisoner system as of February of 2022, and I believe the figure was of the $5 billion, at least $40.5 million was to inmates. Explain to me how the administration can look anybody in the eye and tell them they did everything they could do to stop this, to prevent this. Because the way I look at it is, while other states were attempting to close the door, and I get it, some of this stuff was nation state actors, yada, yada, okay? Indiana got hit with it too. But when Indiana was attempting to limit their losses, we left the door wide open. Left it wide open. Prisoners wasn't implemented, still wasn't implemented as of February 2022. Is that now implemented?
So clearly, the Illinois Department of Employment Security was there fielding questions from the Legislative Audit Commission members. Those also, by the way, they meet every month. So JCAR meets every month. Legislative Audit Commission meets every month. So those are those bipartisan kind of oversight groups. So there's always interesting things popping out of there. They had a long discussion about that yesterday morning. While that was going on over in the Senate Executive Appointments Committee, this is the committee that oversees executive appointments from, say, Governor J.B. Pritzker to various state agencies. One in particular I wanted to highlight, and we'll get to in a moment, but they did approve 2 different individuals for the FOID Card Review Board. This is a new board that was set up by a previous FOID card reform law several years ago that's supposed to be handling the denials for people getting their FOID card. And we'll actually unpack that maybe tomorrow or the day after, because I think it's important to highlight where we've come. If you remember, even before the pandemic, there was a backlog of people getting their FOID cards approved or renewed, and it was in the hundreds of thousands of people waiting months on end. when it should only take 30 to 60 days, and people were being denied their Second Amendment rights because there was a backlog. But either way, they had 2 members of the FOID card board that were approved through the committee. They also had an inspector general for the Department of Children and Family Services, the Child Welfare Agency. And what was interesting here is you have the conversation about investigations into child death. But here's Ann McIntyre, the DCFS Inspector General, during yesterday's Executive Appointments Committee hearing.
In fiscal year 23, we reviewed and responded to 768 complaints, which was a 16% increase from fiscal year 2022. In FY23, we issued 25 full investigative reports. Pursuant to administrative rule, the OIG also investigates deaths or serious injuries in foster homes, child welfare institutions, independent living programs, and other facilities licensed by the department, as well as deaths and serious injury when there was an open child welfare service case or a child protection investigation within 12 months of the death. We conduct a review of the department's involvement with the family in these cases to identify practice errors and missed opportunities for intervention on behalf of children and families. These investigatory reviews aim to inform recommendations to improve child welfare practice.
So, I get paid to do what I do here, right? I mean, my full-time gig with the Center Square and also Illinois Radio Network, I delve into audits, and this is me doing this in the morning from my home. It's really kind of, hey, you know what, why not just bring even more to you guys? But I read these audits, I read these investigation reports, and they're just sometimes horrifying, especially when you read about the number of children who've died after having some kind of interaction with the Department of Children and Family Services, especially when you see the just amounts of speculated fraud, whether or not they're actually going after that fraud, and so on. But some questions during this committee hearing yesterday for the Inspector General of DCFS, State Senator Steve McClure jumped in.
In FY22, there was a significant amount of child deaths that were investigated, and it was a big increase from FY21. Does your office have the resources to investigate all of these issues with DCFS right now? And how is the staffing there currently? Because I think one of the big complaints that we receive as legislators is that there aren't enough DCFS employees to investigate things and to ensure that the kids of our state are safe.
Mm-hmm.
So
that seems to always be a question about staff and employees and so on. McClure also jumps into reports of other child death
that we reviewed that met our criteria for review. Last year, yes, we had 171 deaths that we reviewed that met our criteria for review. Of those, we conducted 37 full investigations. But it is important to note that our review does not necessarily indicate off the bat that there is misconduct, either by the department or even abuse or neglect by a family member. This is just, that's our criteria.
So the criteria they laid out, the reports they did. We've had other audits come out, not necessarily from the Inspector General who was testifying there, but we've had other audits come out from DCFS that they were not properly reporting suspected abuse to law enforcement in a timely manner. So that was another major issue that they had to contend with. You've got more from the Inspector General in front of the Senate Executive Appointments Committee.
For reviewing these cases, and that's how we ended up with 171. Seriously?
And that happened. I was actually in the basement monitoring this hearing and another hearing, and then I heard this come over the intercom system, and it was the first Tuesday of the month. What do you expect, right? I mean, they went through the gamut of this is just a test, get out of the building, this is just a test, fire tests, storm tests, this test, that test. Ultimately, they finished it up in about 3 minutes, and they went on with the hearing. But it wasn't the only disruption, I guess, if you could, about what happened at the Capitol yesterday. You had dozens and dozens and dozens of families at the Capitol fighting for the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program. This program, it allows for private donations to go into a pot of money that can then be used to give grants to families and schools of their choice. It's helped out tens of thousands of families over 5 years. There's currently like 9,400 families or so that are taking advantage of this. It is not state tax dollars. It is private donations. Now, those private donors get a 75% Illinois income tax credit, but the public school unions don't like this measure, and they're fighting to let it expire. It expires at the end of this year. Legislators did nothing on it last week where they were in for fall veto session. They've got 2 days left now. Yesterday, on the third of the first of the last 3 days, they did nothing on the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program, but families were there in droves to let their voice be heard. And they're chanting, "Call the bill, call the bill, call the bill." And they're outside of Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch's office. "Call the bill, Mr. Speaker." That's what they're chanting. If you've never been to the Capitol, I encourage you to head there. It's gorgeous. Especially the rotunda, third floor, outside the Speaker's office. You can go up to the fourth floor and see it. But obviously, families were there. They've been there for the past 2 weeks, chanting, trying to get in front of lawmakers to have that continue. We'll see what happens in the last few days here as legislators are in session to deal with, a variety of things. But will they actually take up the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program? A question that I guess we'll wait and see, all right? But keep it here with Bishop on Air each and every weekday morning. We'll break things down for you, all right? Appreciate everybody tuning in and having a good time here and sharing comments on the live feed, people commenting on the segments that we bust out later on. So I greatly appreciate it. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow me, whatever. You can email me as well, bishoponair@gmail.com. All right, make it happen. Coming up next, for those in and around the Springfield area, the Council Corral, a review of last night's Springfield City Council meeting where they talked about residency. Stay tuned. Time for the Council Corral. A review of last night's Springfield City Council meeting, and it was a 2.5-hour meeting. Oh boy, a long one. But I think we'll just give you really the meat and potatoes, right? We can go through the process and pick apart all the little things, but let's just get right on into it, right? So that you get an idea with a short time amount here that we have together to hear what happened at last night's Springfield City Council meeting, all right? So it is the Council Corral. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to like, subscribe, and check us out each and every weekday morning. And if there's a council meeting, we bring you the highlights here with the Council Corral, all right? So tell your friends if you missed any of the previous ones, just check out my YouTube page and you can follow along there, all right? The Council Corral each and every Wednesday. If there is a Springfield City Council meeting, we bring it to you here, all right? So let's go ahead and get on into it, where you had last night's full city council meeting, and Springfield Mayor Misty Buscher, the chair, of course, and they had Aldermen there. Alderwoman Conley was via phone. But the real crux of the meeting dealt with the question of residency. And if you're not familiar with this, residency requirement was put into effect several years ago after a non-binding resolution asking, referendum to the voters of Springfield, should city employees live in the city of Springfield? And they overwhelmingly said yes. So they brought about a new resolution and they said, we need you to live in the city of Springfield if you're going to work for the city of Springfield. But here we are, post-COVID. and it's hard to recruit anybody. I think a lot of people recognize this. Here is the resolution that was brought forward, an ordinance that would put a moratorium in place. And let me make sure we've got this audio all worked out here and crank that up. All right, here we go.
City of Springfield Code of Ordinances. The chair will entertain a motion to place agenda number 2023-494 on final passage.
So move. Second.
We have a motion and a second. There's also in front of you an amendment on your desk for this particular ordinance. So the chair will entertain a motion to amend agenda item number 2023-494 with that amendment that's in front of you.
Moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second on the amendment. Any discussion on the proposed amendment?
And they went on to discuss the amendments. They actually amended it a couple of times because, the idea is to lift the moratorium, or rather to put a moratorium in place on the residency rule. So essentially they're lifting the residency rule. But they didn't really put a sunset on it. So they came back and amended it a couple of times to allow for a review, to review it. So ultimately, for those of you just, check it in and you want to get out, they did pass this lifting of the residency requirement, a moratorium of sorts. They passed it. It's in place. I imagine the mayor will sign it. And the debate around it, I think, was what's really fascinating, though, because you hear from the HR director, you hear from those with substantial questions, you even hear from former alder people chiming in on this. So let's go ahead and hear from the HR director about the residency requirements and how putting a hold on it and allowing for people outside of the city of Springfield corporate limits to apply and work for the city of Springfield, it's going to help with recruitment because they desperately need it.
We're not the only ones with these trends, nor are we the only ones who are having a hard time with recruiting right now, nor are we the only ones who are having people make employment decisions by just not showing up. That's a new trend. That has been happening more frequently than it ever has in my 3.5, 4 decades of managing human resources. So it is reflective of the trends that are happening, but it also is a math problem whenever you're doing recruitment. So we have people who get to the date of hire and just don't come in, and then we're calling them and finding out they made a different decision. And that's happening with a greater frequency, but not just here at the city of Springfield. It's happening everywhere as it relates to employment.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think, because it is, it's not just government jobs. You hear it at the State House, you hear it at the City Hall. It's jobs really all over the place. It's hard to find people to work. Not really sure why. Alderman Donnellan, he wanted to make sure it was clear as to what his thoughts are on this.
Years ago, we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applicants to become a firefighter. And I was sent this information this morning by Local 37. I thought it kind of tells the story. It doesn't go all the way back to the early 2000s, but in 2016, we had 734 applicants to try to be a firefighter. 2018, 639. 2021, 500. 2022, the most recent, 315. Okay, those are the applicants. So it went from 734 to 315 from 2016 to 2022. And those aren't the ones that make it through the process, my understanding is. Those are just the applicants. Now think about that. There's lots of reasons why. I think COVID-19 was a part of it. I think just, the struggle with attracting people that you alluded to earlier, just nationwide. Some people just evidently don't want to work. I don't have the magic 8 ball, but my point is I take this topic very seriously, and we have to think about ways to do things differently and outside the box.
So clearly, they've got the questions here about residency and whether or not they need to lift the moratorium, because as you heard, the numbers of people actually applying for these jobs down significantly. But you have here Alderwoman Jennifer Notoriano with some interesting questions and some back and forth with the HR director for the city of Springfield.
So I guess I don't know where these employees are going to come from, right? It appears to me that everyone in Sangamon and Menard counties who wants to work is currently employed, and if you look at the BLS statistics for Peoria and Bloomington and Champaign, and even Decatur, their unemployment rates are also at record lows. So I just don't know that there are people out to be gotten.
Well, it's a great question, right? I mean, if the unemployment rate is low, are people looking for work? Listen, I know a lot of people who are employed and they want to get another job. And that's a point that the HR director made here as well from last night.
With the record unemployment, and you are absolutely right, those numbers tell us that we are probably pulling from people who have jobs. So we're not looking for the people who are not employed because they don't have the requisite skills for many of the positions. We are looking to get them to make a change in their employment. And that is a different type of outreach than what you do when you have a large unemployment and you have a pool of candidates who are actively looking. We've got to make connections that entice them to just update their resume, because often that's the piece that says, oh, if I apply for that job, I got to write a new resume, I've got to do a cover letter, I've got to be prepared. So we're currently identifying what those recruitment relationships can be, both. And
again, that recruitment process has got to be difficult, especially if people just aren't applying for the job. It's more from the HR director.
The pandemic had a huge change on how people evaluate, where do I want to work? And so the answer to that question isn't the one that I've used for the last 20 years. It's a new answer. And so you've got to ask the question and you've got to listen. This piece won't take care of that, because in that same data, because the Springfield information, when you look at workforce availability, there isn't one just for Springfield. So generally, I don't use Springfield MSA because it includes Menard County. I look at just Sangamon County. And here's what I know about Sangamon County. It has reduced in the number of people that are in the workforce, and that is reduced by 3%. I also know from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that the demand for jobs in Springfield is increasing.
So clearly there's a lot of questions here, but also other indications of, people, if they live in Jerome or if they live, in South Sangamon County somewhere, they have a mortgage that's 2.5%, and you're going to ask them to move to Springfield to get a mortgage that's now at 7 or 8%? I mean, that's a substantial amount of money to ask for people. But clearly, city says they need this tool.
It's changed since the residence, but the world has changed since the residency went into effect. For every day longer, it cost us money, it cost us productivity, it cost us in my staff time when we get all the way up and they say, I just can't move in. I just can't do that to the kids right now. Mm-hmm. And we lose them.
But they have a year to move, right?
They do have a year, but that's a commitment.
We also have a waiver process, right?
For up to 6 months for specific criteria, but it's making a commitment.
Sure.
And many of us know that often what the job we're going into isn't going to be the job we hold our entire life. Mm-hmm. And to disrupt or make a decision is challenging.
Yeah, and I think, again, when you look at going from a low mortgage rate to a high mortgage rate, so moving to the city of Springfield for a job, how are you going to recruit people, right? Getting qualified people. You've got others here. Alderman Hanauer, he gave a pretty impassioned speech and wrapped things up with a statement he wanted to make sure was clear.
In a perfect world, it'd be great if everybody could live in the city of Springfield. But we got people that in Jerome, New Bern, or Jerome and Leland Grove, that we're saying, no, you're not good enough to work here. That's ridiculous. And I just think that we got to do whatever we can to attract more applicants and get the best people for the job. End of sermon.
End of sermon, he says. And then you had others chiming in. Alderman Roy Williams Jr. had some pointed questions for the HR director.
And put a moratorium on those positions for a while until they improve, and then revisit and all this other stuff you guys are talking. But right now, it's like you just threw the whole thing out. No, we're just going to open it up for every position, am I right?
Well, it's a couple things. We are seeing the applications be reduced for every position. There are some that are harder than others, and certainly some that I would focus. My understanding of Peoria's residency requirements isn't just that they lift for, but that they have different requirements based on different positions and union contracts, and that the majority have to be within 20 miles of City Hall, whether it's within the residency or not, which is
so clearly there's a lot of various specific things that they consider when it comes to residency, but the moratorium, again, it's the council corral. A review of last night's full city council meeting. We do this each and every Wednesday morning. There's a Springfield City Council meeting. I'll bring you the council corral here with Bishop on air, okay? So check it out. But here's my little... I'm sorry. Sometimes it's kind of weird to sit here just talking to a camera and realize your hand gestures. Anyways, so talking about lifting the residency requirement because it's hard to find people to get to work. But Alderman Williams did have some pointed questions for the HR director last night. Here's the Ward 3 Alderman.
Do you know of anybody waiting for once this passes that you're going to hire that doesn't live in Springfield right now, but you're going to hire as soon as this passes?
I know 2 people that we lost at the end of the hiring process.
I asked that's on the list or that you know that are waiting.
But we don't get that far if they're not residents right now. I have a staff member who is waiting, who took the job with the intention of moving into Springfield, who has been looking for houses and can't find one, and is definitely watching the residency because they're going to have to make a painful decision.
Yeah, well,
I also
the waiver
know.
apply there. I'm so sorry.
Alderman
Yes, I'm
Williams
sorry.
has the floor.
My question is there a list or do you have any knowledge of anybody outside of Springfield that's waiting to be hired, but they can't get hired until we pass this ordinance? Or do you have any knowledge of any people like that? Not your staff, not any of those kind of things.
I do not have anybody that we've put a hold on a position waiting for this residency decision.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So again, there you've got the HR director taking some questions, some direct questions from Springfield Alderman Roy Williams Jr. You've got Alderman McMenamin, former Springfield Alderman. He's no longer an elected official, but he wanted to talk about the idea of recruiting from the inside, and a lot of talk about low unemployment rates and how people are already employed and how do you attract them to come to the city of Springfield to work. But what about those who are in the city of Springfield already working? Here's Alderman McMenamin.
But when the unemployment rate is 4%, as you pointed out, Director, we're trying to recruit already hired people and encourage them to go for upward mobility with our city. And let's not forget that our median pay in our city is about $80,000 a year. Pretty soon, 25% of our employees will be making over $100,000 a year. We want that money circulating within our city. We've got strong competition out there outside of our city, those villages. We don't want to be subsidizing the growth of our competition, period.
So again,
I want to talk a little bit about...
You've got Alderman McMenamin there raising the issue of recruiting from within and the importance of being competitive with neighboring cities. And listen, I mean, if the village of Chatham, which is just south of Springfield, is going to pay a firefighter even $2,000 more than what the city of Springfield pays, and don't you think that the firefighter is going to go to Chatham and probably live in a community that's of 7,000 people or whatever the case may be? Same goes for firefighters. Same goes for clerical workers or whatever the case may be, bureaucrats, so to speak. But clearly you've got the question of is the residency requirement now harming people? But people in the city of Springfield, like Diane Howard, she took the stand and said, hey, there are plenty of people in the city of Springfield that are ready and willing to work.
Of those 27, 22 have bachelor's degrees.
She's talking about her family.
You understand what I'm saying? All 22 have applied to work with the city of Springfield, including myself. I'm a Navy veteran. I graduated cum laude with my bachelor's degree in law office administration, but the city of Springfield has thrown my application in the circular file for things that I was qualified for. This is disheartening. It's disheartening to hear that you feel you need to go outside of Springfield to find someone, and they're here. They are here. You're not reaching out to them. They're at McDonald's. They're at Burger King. You ever heard about people with bachelor's degrees working in low-paying jobs? Because they are not given a chance here. Because you're not going by their education or their experience. You're going by who knows who. It's a long-standing tradition of Springfield, city of Springfield, only hiring those people who know somebody or was put forth by somebody.
It's a criticism I've heard for a long time. I'm not from Springfield, but I've been covering Springfield City Hall for 13 years or so. And that's a criticism you hear, really, I think, in any town. It's in politics and government, period. It's not about who's qualified. It's about who you know as to whether you're going to get the job. I mean, that's why we've got, different regulations here in Illinois. What is it, RUTAN? And making sure that in the hiring process, it's not about, scratching people's backs and who you know. It's pretty incredible. But Diane Howard continued with some of her final comments here.
There are too many young boys and girls, where they go, that live in Springfield, that want these jobs, that need these jobs, that deserve these jobs. They deserve it. Springfield residents deserve to be able to work for their city, and they don't need to compete with somebody who doesn't live here. We live here. This is our city.
Thank you, ma'am.
So again, it's Diane Howard, and there were several other speakers. It was a 2-hour, 40-minute hearing, a meeting last night, and ultimately they did get to the vote, and here's how that broke down.
Alderwoman Conley, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Okay. I'll let you call
7
it.
ayes and 3 nays, Mayor.
Thank you, Clerk Lessing.
So the measure passes, and there you go. Residency is going to be halted for, I don't know, how long. They didn't put a sunset on it, which is kind of fascinating. So you've got that likely going to be signed by Mayor Misty Buscher. So if you live in the area and you want to work for the city of Springfield, you might want to see what kind of jobs are available. Put an application in, brush it up. Maybe you're looking for a different opportunity or something. I don't know. But they did amend it to say they'll review it in a year. They'll review it in a year. Not that it'll sunset in a year, which would say that the residency requirement would go back into effect and they would have to actually act to keep the moratorium in place. They didn't do that. They just said they're going to come back and review it. All right, well, next week, it's going to be a committee of the whole meeting, so we'll see what they have to say there. Again, I appreciate everybody tuning in. It is the Council Corral, a little bit of a bonus on a Wednesday morning after a Springfield City Council meeting. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for hanging out. Have yourselves a wonderful day. I got to get out of here and head over to the Illinois State Capitol for the second of the final 3 days of legislative veto session. All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning about 7:40, so be sure to tune in, all right?